This episode of the podcast is brought to you by our friends at Track Farms and their excellent CBD products. It's been a minute since Track Farms has been on the podcast. I love those guys so much. They had some reconfiguring to do. They finally got me stocked back up, and now I am back into the CBD. And for me, this is something that I have with my morning vitamins. I mean, this is a daily thing using their tinctures. I specifically think that I like the peppermint one. Love that flavor, and we've got the 1,500 milligram one, nice and strong for a big guy like me. CBD, Track Farms, get into it. They got the best stuff around. We'll have lots more on the podcast about them soon. track-farms.com/strangers. If you use the code STRANGERS at checkout, you're going to get 15% off. Jordan Hanssen, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tyler.
I am excited about this conversation. We're in the beautiful state of New Mexico, in Albuquerque. We got the Rio Grande behind us. Like, everybody should go watch the video version because this is where we're at. It's a good spot.
Yeah, this turned out better than I thought it would.
Yeah. You're prepared, too. I like that you have the sunglasses on because you've got some good sun behind you.
Yeah, seriously. It's may as well be a summer day anywhere else.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's not bad. Unfortunately, I feel like I haven't gotten a chance to really experience Albuquerque yet because, we haven't been here all that long. We're not staying all that long, unfortunately. And so much has been shut down in the state that I haven't been able to train jiu-jitsu here like I normally would in most towns. So I'm a little bit stuck. I've just been working a lot, man. But we have gone out to the petroglyph monument we've seen the volcano side of things. Mm-hmm. And I know there's a petroglyph side too, which is that worth going over to as
Absolutely,
well?
yeah. And the thing is that you can do that in 90 minutes. It's actually the road that you turn down on here. If you turn the other direction, it would take you right to it.
Oh, perfect.
And yeah, you should absolutely go to it. And it's really short, and it's a really pretty extraordinary thing. It's 800 years of history, maybe a little bit more. That's
nice.
Just sitting right up the road.
Beautiful. I'm a little worried about the wind. I'm going to try to block it with my body. Sorry if you're listening to this and I have not done a good enough job. Yours should be all right, I think, because directionally, I've just got to use these broad shoulders of mine. Congratulations on something else that's interesting, which is in 40. Which episode did I say we're doing? 45 or something like that. I think that's what it is. You're the tallest guest that I've had. You are taller than me, and no one has been taller than me on this podcast so far. I just thought that'd be an interesting place to break the ice.
Yeah. No, I'm glad I could take that ring.
Yeah, man. Do you feel tall as a person, or is that like? See, here's what my thing was: is I grew over like one summer, like an insane amount, like ridiculous, and I've always still felt just as short as I was when I was a kid. So when I walk in a room, I still feel like the shortest person. It's a real complex. Do you feel like the tall guy in the room, or how do you feel?
I've always been kind of bigger.
Okay.
So I think that, and I came from a tall family, so I knew that was going to come in at one time or the other.
Right.
And so I've always been pretty big.
But you weren't a late bloomer then? You were bigger than the other kids?
I just kind of grew pretty consistently.
Bastard. That must be nice. Must have a normal sense of yourself in the world.
Well, but what's nice is when I started rowing in college, I mean, that's a sport where, everybody's really tall. And so what was really nice is to walk into a place where you'd walk around and you wouldn't feel super tall. Like You're surrounded by people that are between 6'2" and 6'6". And it's like everybody's within this, 4-inch range. And then you go back into the rest of life, and it's, a range of about 2 feet.
Yeah, exactly. That must be interesting. I don't know that I've ever been in a situation like that. I mean, I was like a theater major in college, so it was a bunch of tiny guys around. It was
just people of various heights.
Tiny people.
Yeah, no. Mostly. Rowing tends to bring in the tall people.
Is that like you've got that leverage or something?
Yeah,
or what's the deal?
It's all about leverage. It's funny is that I got a friend of mine who he rowed lightweight at UW, and so this guy's like 100 and. He had to maintain an average weight of 155 pounds, and he's better part of 6 foot, and he thinks he's small because he was hanging around all these giant rowers that are, 6'5", 220,
right.
And I mean, when it comes to that size, yeah, he is.
That's a skinny guy. That was about me for a long time.
Yeah,
I was real little, like 160. At this height, which was not healthy, I don't think at all. But I wasn't eating anything.
And like now he's 180 pounds, and he's like he's a muscular guy, and he's not small at all, but still, it's funny. He's like, the way he talks about like bigger people, it's like, man, you're actually pretty big too.
Well, I don't think we recognize enough that, like, I think dudes have a lot of body dysmorphia. Like, we address it with women mostly because I think it's usually life-threatening shit with women, like eating disorders and stuff. But with guys, it's like, we're just as confused about how we actually appear to the world. Like, this is a strange thing, especially if it, like for me, like, especially if it happens really fast. And you're like, I'm still just that kid, right? Like, that's
Yeah, well, and I think it, there's lots of ways that it can be really, really destructive. I mean, it's, I don't know, I kind of get it. I mean, there's not, I don't know of a society that's ever existed that hasn't had like, men and women and everybody in between should look like X, Y, and Z.
Right.
And then anybody within that culture who doesn't fit those things ends up being an outlier.
Right.
So, but yeah, I mean, there's like the, steroid abuse and, there's just tons of ways to, hurt yourself regardless of your sex, just because based on how you perceive yourself to the world.
Yeah, it's a strange thing. This is a nice little tangent I've taken us on, by the way. I don't think it's a bad way to introduce you to how this podcast works, because there isn't a direction. I have certain things I come with that I know that I think would be interesting to talk about. But frankly, that was one of them, because I was reading your book and I was like, oh, this guy's gonna be taller than me. That's a first. But let me give some people some background on who you are, what you do. I found you because actually I had seen some of the woodworking and carving stuff you've been doing here in Albuquerque, and you're hanging out here just for COVID, right? Kind of.
Yeah. So I've been able to do work on my laptop. So I live in Seattle normally, but my parents and my brother live down here. I went to high school down here in Albuquerque. Spent some time growing up in Las Cruces as well, which is about 200 miles south of here.
Yep.
And as this thing developed over the summer, I was just thinking to myself, like, I won't see my parents for a while. This thing won't be over, in 2021.
Man, can you believe that?
I can. Like, I don't know.
Did you see it when it first started? Because I was just like everybody else, feeling pretty optimistic. Couple months, we're gonna do some measures, everything will be all right. And here we are, about a year later.
I am not surprised, and I wasn't surprised, and the reason is I'm working on a series of novels that happened between 1896 and 1926. And my major in university was U.S. history and late 1800s, early 1900s, and
Spanish flu,
the Spanish flu.
Yeah.
And if you look at the timeline for that, I mean, like it's a different virus, it's a different time. But right now, like they sync up pretty well. It was a bad first round. It was a really bad second round, and we're still in the middle of that second round, and like the timeline kind of matches.
Yep.
And back in 1920, people were just as up in arms about how society was supposed to deal with it.
Yeah.
There were, there were also a great deal of problems with race that was going on then. This is just a big revisiting of a lot of stuff that's kind of American bugaboos.
Yeah, sure.
Dealing with coming to, like science literacy and, picking and choosing what you want to believe. Those are all they're hard things that we're dealing with now, and we've dealt with them before.
Right. How long did it take last time? Just.
Well, again, this is like, I am like, I'm an amateur historian.
Okay.
So
that's okay. This is all bro science anyway.
Yeah. So, it took, after the third wave, which happened, it's like it came out in a winter, lightened up over the summer, got worse over that next winter, lightened up over the next summer, and then the third wave came, when you would expect it, and then it just seemed like it was got folded into the batter of of humanity, and whether or not this virus acts like that, like who knows? Like we'll see. One thing is that it's, in 2000, like you'd much rather be a virus in 1920 than 2020.
Right.
Like we have way more tools to deal with this.
True.
It's just a matter of, getting people on the same page.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because we've got way more tools to deal with a virus, but how we communicate with each other has gotten far more complicated. It's way harder to find authoritative sources, and it's way harder to hear any nuanced talk in the middle of all the noise from either side of whatever issue. It's complicated, man.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I think that I've been thinking of that I like a takeaway that I learned from rowing is, so the boats that I learned how to row in they're 8-person boats, and I would race in 8s and 4s, in pairs. And, when like the, coach teaches you how to row, everybody needs to row the exact same way for the boat to go really fast.
Right.
And so if you get 8 people, like it might not be the most efficient stroke that the coach, teaches the group, but if they all pull that way, that boat is more than likely to go faster than a boat where 8 people are trying to pull in their own unique fashion.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
So like you might not agree with, I think we could, like I should be pulling this way. It's like at some point, if you want the boat to go, you just kind of got to be like, maybe this could be done a different way,
right?
But I got to pull together.
Yeah, and everybody has to make concessions when that's the case, right?
Yeah.
Like everybody's got to see the nuance of that. By the way, if your headphones are making a lot of wind noise at any point, just I have the sound canceling turned on, or the noise canceling turned on.
I don't hear anything.
Okay, if it starts to get annoying, because like mine, I don't think that's actually happening in my microphone. I'm pretty sure it's just the noise canceling. I love these headphones though, man. I wear these
great.
all day long. So you've written a book about a certain adventure that you had that is very foreign to anything I'm familiar with in the world, and I think you brought me a copy, which I'm pretty stoked about.
Yeah.
It's called Rowing into the Sun. Jordan Hanssen. Show it to the camera there. Do the good media shot.
There you go.
And this was a rowing expedition, a rowing race that you did with three other teams, right? It was 4 teams total.
So it was ocean rowing in terms of races. The first race was in 1997.
Mm-hmm.
The first 2 people to do it were these 2 Norwegian guys in 1896. Harbour and Samuelson. They left New York and rowed to eventually to France. The nearly 100 years later, they start putting together these races across the Canary Islands, and in between that time, there had been about probably 30 or 40 other ocean rowers or boats that had been rowed across the ocean, and ours was the first time that they did a race from New York to England. So, and the first time it was 4-person boats. So the company that put it together, they had spots for 14, and that's what they were billing it for. 7 teams signed up, and 4 made it to the starting line.
Nice.
So 3 teams from England and us.
Yeah. And you made it.
We did.
Dang, you rowed across the fucking Atlantic Ocean, man. That is insane.
Yeah, I don't want to ruin the book, but we also won.
Yeah, well, I'm assuming people would get that you made it since you're here, but you did win, and you've got a Guinness World Record as far as I had heard, right?
Yeah. So we were the first ones to. It's a funny thing about Guinness World Records is we were the first ones to make it from mainland USA to mainland UK without assistance, but the first 2 guys that did it, who did it in an open boat that was 18 feet long in 1896. Whoa. They made it to the Scilly Isles without assistance in 55 days. And the Scilly Isles are an archipelago. It's about 50 miles away from England. So if they'd kept rowing, they probably would have, made that, and that would have made our Guinness World Record something that, we wouldn't have been able to get a record for that.
That is wild. And just the 2 of them then, right?
Yeah, just the 2 of them.
You had 4 guys, and you were doing it in shifts of 2.
Totally.
So how did you – so I did get a chance to start the book, but we scheduled this podcast too quickly for me to finish. But as far as I know so far, it was like 2 on, 2 off. It seems like you guys did like 2-hour shifts in that. But is that constant? Like you only got 2 hours of sleep at a time also?
Yeah, so unless we had the sea anchor, which is sea anchor it's a parachute attached to the bow of the boat that sits underneath the water and holds the bow into the waves. And when it was too rough to row, we could get a little bit more sleep that way. But for the most part, it was you'd only get 90 minutes at a time. And that was you'd probably only be able to pull that off 4 times a day.
That is rough.
It was sleep deprivation is a very peculiar thing to function under, especially in a really regimented sense like that, because your day ends up, like each 24-hour period gets turned into basically 6 days. And so within a week, like you're going to have some good days and your bad days. And in a single day, like the level of emotional ups and downs is huge.
Yeah.
You wake up and you're like, oh man, I feel really great for this shift, and then the next one you just wanted to end it.
Yeah. Dang, man. It's got to be so different rowing out on open water. I mean, I'm thinking of like so my only knowledge of rowing is probably just most average people who have no connection to it, where I've seen the Olympics, I've seen that style of race rowing, and they're always on some glassy water, you know. I mean, it's like they're doing it on a pool. This is a totally different thing, isn't it?
Yeah. So the funny thing about race rowing versus what we did is, I mean, rowing is at its heart, it's like running races and horse racing. I mean, this is how people got about. If you lived on the water, you knew how to do this 100 years ago. And I mean, every single lake you go to anywhere in the world where you see a little, 10 to, 50 horsepower engine, 100 years ago, that was people rowing a boat. It was a common way to get around. And rowboats have a very useful shape. You can fit a lot of stuff in them, and they make a really consistent speed. And so you can fill a 18-foot rowboat with 1,000 pounds of stuff and then row it at a few knots all day long. And that's what it's designed to do, and that's why it's effective. So race rowing happened because in the mid-19th century, you had the Industrial Revolution, and people were you started getting a lot more people who have a lot more free time, and the kind of work that they're doing is sit-down work, and it's thinking work. And so, no one has to worry about being in any kind of fitness or shape if you're out there working on a farm, or if you're a blacksmith, if you're laying brick or things like that. But, just the same way, like you see it all over. This is, again, another problem that we're still dealing with. People 150 years ago were just as concerned that, people weren't being fit and that they were getting soft from all this inactivity. And so pretty much all of our modern sports, including rowing, can get traced back to the 1830s and 50s when they started to set this up as specifically a form of recreation. And any sports leagues and things like that, they start to come together in the 1860s to the 1880s. And rowing, they started with this incredibly practical device, and they started figuring out, well, how can we make this faster? So they made it skinnier, they made it lighter, they made it longer. They got to the point where they had to add outriggers to it to make it even skinnier and longer, and it just made it faster and faster. And the cost for all that speed is that it was no longer a practical device. But like racing bikes versus mountain bikes, it just got really, really specific. And so when you're doing flat water racing in college or high school, the Olympics, you need flat water, and you can pour power into it. Whereas the way the boats were designed was to handle pretty rough water and carry a lot of stuff at a really consistent rate of speed. And if you're going to cross the ocean, that's like that. The boat kind of looks like a long ship had a baby with a V2 rocket, but below the waterline, it's just basically a gig boat, which is a gig boat was one of the things that they would use to go drop pilots off on ships, or in the case of like in the English Channel, they'd use gig boats to actually smuggle, and there were laws saying that you could only have six oarsmen in the boat, because if not, you could outrun the Coast Guard. So if there was a gig boat that had 8 oarsmen in it, then they would confiscate that boat.
That's so strange.
Yeah, because you could outrow, you could just run stuff back and forth across the channel and not pay the crown its tax.
So what's the difference? I'm curious what the difference is physically in terms of output, because I have to imagine when you're in a race on that glassy water, you're pushing that cardio level to like full intensity. It's like everything you've got, peak cardio. Is it a little different on the ocean when you have to pace yourself?
It's way different. Yeah. You can't muscle a 3,000
You're
pound
walking,
boat.
You're not sprinting.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So you're just dropping that in the water and using your body weight on the way back, whereas in the race boats, you're just trying to fit 90 minutes of a soccer game into 6 minutes.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a different thing, because you got to you can, if you're pulling a 2,000 meter piece, you can afford to rip your hands up, because you won't be racing until the next week. But with this, it's like you can't go out and wreck your hands every single shift.
Right, exactly.
So you have to row with light hands. You have to row, firmly and gently across the sea.
Yeah. How do you even eat to recover from that? Because I'm thinking it must be the difference between what a sprinter eats, which is all like sort of a modern health mix of fats and meats and things like that, versus, there's the ultra marathoners who tend to enjoy their candy and a lot of simple sugars and a lot of things to keep themselves going. Like, how did you guys kind of keep your energy up for this?
On the first trip, we didn't bring enough food. So between the four of us, we lost about 140, 150 pounds.
Whoa. What do you mean the first trip? You did this more than once?
I have.
Really?
Yeah.
How did I not know that?
I thought
this was the story of the time you did this. How many times did you do it?
I've done it twice.
Twice.
Yeah,
Both New York to
No, the second one was Senegal towards Miami, but that one we capsized and had to get rescued, and then we found a boat.
Ouch. Was it the same guys both times?
Well, my friend Greg, who's in the book, he was our shore manager, and I did it with another guy that I rode with in college, a guy named Pat, and then this guy named Adam Creek, who's a Canadian gold medalist, who did our food for that trip, and we ate really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
And then this guy Marcus Pukonen, who's actually in the middle of a 5-year trip around the world right now.
Wow.
He's still in India, but he's
interesting timing for that right now.
Yeah,
must be hard.
He hasn't used a motor in 5 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, he's doing it by himself then. He's out there rowing.
Well, no, it's not just rowing. It's just non-motorized. So
Okay.
it could be sailing,
Okay.
biking, pogo stick. He's done
Wow.
he's done all kinds of stuff.
Wow, that's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first time then, and you've run out of food, which must be fairly devastating.
Yeah. No, that ended up being the real challenge. And I think the difference is, I mean, I'm 38 now. I was 23 when this happened. So we were all out of college, and I saw this poster advertising this race across the ocean, and I just couldn't get the idea out of my head. And
see, I could have. You know what I mean? I could have seen that and been like, man, it's crazy what some people do, huh? And but you know what? That's not necessarily true. I could see there's other things I've been drawn to that's like it's like jujitsu. It's like, why do I want to go get hurt all the time? But then I do, and it's an obsession. So I guess I can understand, but it's not
totally.
nearly to the scale of what you're talking about.
I mean, it all kind of depends on like the types of things you're attracted to. But yeah, where are we going with
Well,
that?
So I was curious how you ate to recover from this, but then you said basically you didn't.
Well, yeah. So I mean, the thing was that we were young and we hadn't done anything like this before, and so this was like, the biggest thing we'd all done was graduate from college, and so like we all rode together. We knew how to write some papers, but in terms of practical application, like we knew that this was going to be a thing that was going to teach us those things, and that there were going to be mistakes along the way. And probably the best advice I got was we were actually getting pretty close to leaving Seattle for New York. And it was actually the day that the food was being packed, and I was working on the boat while the 3 other guys were working on the food. And I finished all of my projects that day, and I was like, oh, sweet, I got time to go to the bar. And I was, at this point, you're doing all this fundraising, and I just wanted to break from it.
Yeah.
I just wanted to drink, and I didn't want to talk about it. So I sit down next to this guy, and it's at this neighborhood in Seattle called Ballard, which is the old Scandinavian district. And I sit down to this salty looking dude, and he's like, hey, what do you do? And I was like, shit. So I was like, well, this is what I'm doing. And then he just kind of looks at all the bottles of liquor behind the wall and turns to me and says, it's all about how you recover from your first big fuck up. And I was like, man, that is some real advice.
That is great advice.
Well, yeah, and I think the funny thing about that was by that point in the project, we'd spent 18 months doing it. And people like to give other people advice a lot. And some of that advice is really good. Like some unvolunteered advice or volunteered advice is great. But the advice that's usually really good is the advice that you seek out. And this was some volunteered advice that just really resonated with me. And I thought about that when we realized we didn't bring enough food. And it was really like from that point, like what he was talking about is that in a project of that size, there was going to be a point where either success was going to come from that or it was going to be failure.
Yeah. And once you've gotten over that first big hurdle, it's like the next one's easier. The next one's like, well, we did the other one.
Yeah. I mean, you start, putting in, you keep putting in more miles, and you get a little bit closer there, and it's just like there was, it got towards the end where the way I described it is that like we were all on a balance beam, and someone was always falling off, and that was probably the most inspiring thing for me was because at that point like we'd gotten pretty salty and we were pretty testy with one another, but people give each other space in different kinds of ways out there, and for me, what my experience with it was that every single time it looked like someone was, about to go off the rails, people reached out and pulled back, and then someone else started falling off again.
Right.
And it was a really beautiful thing that I am glad that I was aware of it at the time. But at that point, you still like, there's all these questions like, are we going to make it?
Yeah.
Because it got right down to the very edge.
That's got to be hard, man, because you guys put so much work into this from the outset. I mean, it was everything. And the idea that you might not make it must have been really, really tough to
yeah, especially when you're that young. Because, I mean, it's there's things like that are a lot more important then.
Yeah.
And, you kind of got like less equipment or less memories to fall back on.
Yeah, you don't have the context of failing on various things and realizing everything's okay.
Yeah.
Always is okay.
We'd worked 18 months on this just after college, and that was the biggest thing that we had done up to that point, and it was a big thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I was curious about some of the interpersonal stuff because there's people that I can't there's people I really like who after about 4 hours, I'm like, man, I need to go home and just be with myself again. I think my wife is the only person who I don't feel that way about. Luckily, that works for us since we live in a 33-foot trailer now. So that works out. We can be together all day long. We've always been like that. But there's definitely certain people that I wouldn't be able to handle that. But it seemed to me like as I was reading, you guys, had lived together, had kind of been building like this teamwork environment, so like maybe that was a little easier from the start, but it must have gotten hard at some point to have no space to yourself, right?
Well, I think it was hard the whole time. We just knew that the teamwork bit was really important.
Yeah.
I think what helped us is that we the same person taught us how to row. So we were on the same team, although at different times.
Yes, Redbeard, right?
Yeah, Chief Redbeard.
Yeah, okay.
Mike Hagman. And he we all like having that thing to fall back on was really strong. And then we knew that, okay, well, we can all live in this house together. And that's not, rowing across the ocean, but it brought things to the surface earlier on that we were able to deal with. And so in terms of, how people acted out on the water, it was kind of just a more intense version of something that we kind of expected, I mean, we all had our interpersonal relationships that were tested, and towards the end, like I love those guys. I talk to one of those guys at least once a day probably, if it's just a text message, and there's always it's in a sense like it's kind of predictable the way that the breakdown happened. But because we had spent all this time working together beforehand, we kind of knew how each other functioned.
Yeah.
And that was really a strong thing to fall back on. And also because, we'd been working on this thing for 18 months together.
Yeah.
And that was a good base.
It was a shared dream. You had all bought into it.
And that's the thing, is that nobody ever questioned anybody else's commitment the entire time.
Right.
And that allowed people to get really angry at one another and maintain levity.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, and I think, particularly mentioning your coach, like having a shared philosophy in that way has to be huge. Have you seen the show Ted Lasso on Apple TV? Okay. I highly recommend you give that one a watch. I just had to rewatch that because I'm doing a friend's podcast. We're going to talk all about it. Podflix and Chill, everybody. That's his podcast. And it's just essentially about this American football coach who goes over to coach soccer in England. And the man's got a philosophy on coaching that is he's just an angel as a person. And that just makes such a huge difference. I mean, I think back to any sport I've ever played, having a good coach My dad actually coached a lot of my sports teams, which was great because he has a great philosophy for coaching. And then I had bad coaches who inspired no one. And it was always about the superstars, and it was, no one had fun.
Yeah.
So, coming from that common shared background, that's got to make a huge difference. How when a challenge comes up and you all know, like, this is how we look at that. This is how our team looks at that.
Well, and I think rowing is something that really facilitates that because, when you're rowing as a team, I mean, the boat goes, the boat doesn't. There's no one shines for the individuality of their rowing.
Right.
It's how you make the boat move.
So did you have any support that was out there with you, or you were just within radio contact of?
We had a satellite
emergency?
phone, we had a radio, and there was the race organizer's boat, but they ended up having to go in early because we all got hit by a tropical storm. It was almost a hurricane, and they got pretty hammered, and they just had to go in.
Wow.
And that was just the reality of being out in the North Atlantic.
Yeah. I don't want to spoil the ending for myself, but I kind of want to ask if everybody made it. Did all 4 teams make it?
No one died.
Okay, no one died.
No one died.
But not necessarily everybody pulled in to England. Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
Good to know. I don't mind spoilers, though, because
Yeah,
I feel like when I'm reading a book, it's like I'm still there. I'm in that moment. It doesn't matter what I know about it. Like some of my favorite books are ones you read more than once. You know exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't change anything. Man, that is a fantastic story. So then the second time around, getting capsized. Is there a book coming on that, by the way? Because
I've already I've wrote a book about rowing across the ocean, and I think that what I'll end up doing is that was a crazy trip. So after I finished the first row, I just I wasn't done with it. I really wanted to get back out to sea, and ended up doing a trip could kind of clear my head. Ended up doing a bike trip across Australia, and then me and my buddy Greg, who's one of the guys in this boat, we took a rowboat around the Olympic Peninsula, which is an amazing trip. And kind of in those 2 years after this, I ended up meeting this guy named Adam Creek, who's this Canadian gold medalist. We were in San Francisco doing an open water race, and he actually with my buddy Brad, who's also in this book, and then that's how I met him. And I told him about the ocean row. He told me about winning a gold medal, and I was like, maybe this guy wants to row across the ocean. And then I had some other friends that approached me about it. Went to my buddy Greg, and I was like, man, I think we got another team for this. And he was like, I don't know if I got another one in me.
Yeah.
But both times that he wanted to be involved. And so without getting too much into the details, what ended up happening is that Greg stayed on shore and was our shore manager, while myself, Adam, and Pat, we through Adam we got this sponsorship from the Canadian Wildlife Federation, as well as a bunch of other sponsors. And the whole idea was to do adventure education while we're out at sea. So we had $50,000 worth of equipment on the boat, collecting scientific information, and just made it our mission to do outreach to students the whole time using all of these wonderful technologies. And ended up the goal was to go from Dakar, Senegal to Miami. And when we got there, our boat was delayed by, a month and a half.
Wow.
Because of Hurricane Sandy. And so we just kind of found ourselves just waiting it out in Dakar, and it was wild. Like we got to because we had this education angle. One of the schools that we ended up going into was the international school, and so through that, you end up talking. Like the ambassadors' kids are going there, and so we ended up having these crazy situations where we met the American, British, and Canadian ambassador, and just had this incredible time exploring Senegal while we're just sitting there kind of waiting for this boat to show up.
Man.
So that was like 50 days of unexpected adventure. Then we start rowing across the ocean, and things went well, but we broke some oars, but that was okay because we had extras. It was a really slow trip. We were expecting to go a lot faster than we did because we felt like the course was on average was going with better weather than it would have across the North Atlantic. 72 days into it, we were finally starting to make some good miles. We were about 3,000 miles into this 3,800-mile race. And I woke up in the morning, and I woke up like really alert. And I got outside, and I could just feel the waves beneath us, and like the swell was just perfect. Like we were just getting ready to like make a lot of miles that day. And these guys, Adam and Pat were out on deck, and they go inside, and like it's getting breezy, but it's breezy in the right direction. So I hop in the bow seat, which is where I would do the steering from. Marcus hops in the bucket because it's, he's like clockwork at that point. And as they're closing the door, these two waves, they weren't particularly tall. They were shaped like squares. Most waves are shaped like triangles. These were just like walls of water.
Wow.
And they just overwhelmed the boat. The first one filled the whole boat with water. The second one grabbed us and threw us into the back of the first wave, and that just corkscrewed us. And they were, we were in the middle of switching the shifts, and so they were struggling to shut the door. Didn't happen, got flooded, and we got turtled. We spent the next 12 hours. We tried to flip the boat for about 3 hours, and Adam had a pregnant wife and a kid. I was like, we're gonna now's the time to pull the PLB button, and hopped in the life raft and waited it out. And these two guys were Adam and Marcus are Canadian, and Pat's American, and we're sitting there, and we're in the life raft. And the first thing you do when you get in a life raft is you evaluate all the stuff you've been managed to like pull on the life raft, and then look through and make sure everything on the life raft list is what's there, and just kind of see what you got. And in this was a little tiny book called the Little Bible. And so the four of us aren't really, like church going people. And we just kind of look around, and we're like, well, at this point, like we kind of done everything we can. Certainly couldn't hurt.
Time to give it a prayer.
So Marcus starts reading Genesis.
Wow.
And then
who packed the Little Bible then?
Well, it's packed in the life raft.
Oh, it's just standard?
It's standard in the life raft. And this HC-144, which is one of the rescue planes the Coast Guard has, just rips overhead like after he's read 2 or 3 lines. These Canadians start chanting, USA, USA. So we go down, and the Coast Guard's zooming around us, and they drop a barrel full of stuff, which has some survival equipment, including a VHF radio. And they ended up having to drop 2 because the first barrel dropped, and we pull it over, and we looked at it, and it had a list on it that had like a bunch of things that we already had. So we're like, okay, we're not going to open this barrel because we might need it later. And it's like a steel barrel. It's designed to survive being dropped. We'll just if we need the supplies in there, then we'll open it up. Until then, we'll just let it, tie it up next to the boat. And then they drop another barrel, and this one says "Open Me" on it. And this one has a much more comprehensive list that says also a VHF radio. So we get in contact with them, and we're stuck. They're flying around us, and they tell us that they got this ship coming in, and it'll be there in a few hours. And so the ship that shows up is this 580-foot roll-on, roll-off car carrier. That's like 100 feet tall.
Wow. And
it's like a Japanese boat with a Bangladeshi captain and a Filipino crew. And the wind's been, like brisk 25 knots the whole day. We're still attached to the rowboat that's upside down. And in the distance, there's this other Russian tanker that's kind of waiting to pop in if it needs to. And the captain gets on the radio, is like, all right, guys, cut loose. We'll try and catch you. And so this giant ship is sitting there downwind while we're getting blown towards it. And the bow thrusters are holding it into the wind, holding it parallel. And we can see all this crew. And they got their hard hats on. They got their safety orange. Everybody's in life vest. And they're all you can just see, like, from a distance, these guys are amped up. Mm-hmm. They're all sitting there with their line, getting ready to toss it. And we hit the bow, or we hit the wash from the bow thrusters. It's like the waves are gray and white cappy, but like right around the bow thrusters, it's like turquoise because it's just churning all this water to keep the boat parallel. And so that wash grabs us and then zips us down the side of the boat. So it surprises everybody. And so everybody starts throwing their lines. We're trying to reach out for these lines. We miss every single one. And they have to reposition the entire vessel downwind again to do it. So we finally catch a line on the second round, and we have to climb up a rope ladder from this life raft in 6-foot seas up to 45 feet up inside this car carrier.
Whoa!
And like we're all grizzled and sitting there in our underwear. Hop on board, and this crew, like, they wrap us in blankets, and they're like, "You're okay now."
Oh my God, man. That is straight out of a movie, dude. That is wild.
And that wasn't the craziest thing. So
it sure sounded like it.
It was pretty damn crazy. But like from this point and the next 10 days were the craziest 10 days of my life. So we spent 24 hours on this, hanging out with this crew. We watch a bunch of Bollywood movies. It's really surreal.
Is there a language barrier? Or are they speaking
No,
English?
so it's there's Japanese boat, Bangladeshi captain, Filipino crew. The language on board is English.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so they have all these Bollywood movies, and we end up rolling into Puerto Rico. And my buddy Greg from the first trip, he's been managing this disaster from the shore because we have all these sponsors, we have all this family. Like Adam's wife is pregnant.
Right.
Like goes on and on and on, and all these people are waiting for us on the shore, and it's because Greg has organized everything. And we hop on board, everybody, hugs it out. Then he kind of comes from behind the shadows, and he's like, "Hey, you guys ready to, kind of manage this situation? Like, I got a lot of interviews for you lined up starting at 6 a.m. tomorrow with the Today Show."
Wow. Jeez.
So
perfect time. You're definitely mentally ready for that. Right?
Absolutely. So we get like 4 hours sleep, which felt like a huge amount.
Sure.
And the next morning we are going to the Today Show, and then we do like 24 interviews that day. And it was like, either we're going to tell the story or someone else's. So like, we're going to tell it. And then the day after that, their CEO shows up of the Canadian Wildlife Federation, a guy named Wade Lundsey, who'd just been so supportive the entire time. He was just glad we were okay. And, the day after all these interviews, like, kind of see the question is, well, so what about the boat? Like, what are we going to do about it? And I was like, what are we going to do? That's a great question. Like,
where is it at this point?
Yeah, it's floating right next to the Bermuda Triangle at this point.
Okay, so they weren't able to exactly
they
raise
couldn't
it up on board.
pull it out. So,
interesting.
I have this, and I'm trying to do some research on what could we possibly do in this situation? And Wade comes in, and the energy is like, well, let's see what it takes to mount an expedition to go find the boat, because we went across to raise awareness for the Canadian Wildlife Federation, their mission of conservation and looking after the earth, and we've just left our boat in the middle of the ocean, and that doesn't seem to look very good.
Sure.
Plus it has all of our footage on it. It has all of the scientific equipment, all of this information that we'd been collecting every single day.
But would you be able to salvage any of it? I mean, would it be totally flooded?
That's the thing. We wouldn't know unless we found it.
Yeah.
So it was a huge risk, and I did all this research, and I went to Wade, and I was like, well, here's the deal. If we don't look for it, we're not going to find it. But if we look for it, we're probably not going to find it anyway.
Yeah.
And he said, go for it. So that was one of the most intense things that anybody's ever said to me. And it's, I wish Wade was around today because he died a few years after, but he was just, he was so supportive of this moment that was, it was the most intimidating thing that anyone's ever said. And so it was like, okay, well, we're going to do this. And I'm start getting on the phone to try and figure out, okay, we got to find an airplane to find it in the middle of nowhere. And I'm in Puerto Rico, and, my Spanish is not that great. So I'm speaking Spanglish to people trying to figure this thing out. Meet this guy named Raul, and Raul's like, amigo, we're going to find the boat. And I was like, okay, man, I don't know if we are, but I really appreciate your enthusiasm.
Wow.
So we flipped on a Saturday. We're found Saturday night. We're in San Juan, Puerto Rico on Sunday. Did all these interviews on Monday. Tuesday, Wade basically lays down the challenge. Wednesday, we sort this thing out. Thursday morning, me and Greg and our videographer, Chris, and photographer Aaron, we're all going up with Raul in this turboprop and headed out towards the Bermuda Triangle to look for the boat.
Yeah, nothing's ever gone wrong in that area before I played.
Yeah.
So,
and so I'm thinking, you know what? The way that this has to look like is that I have to give it my best effort.
right.
And I feel I would have felt like the best effort was like, hey, we made this happen. We went and looked for it. Either we're going to find it and we didn't, or we won't. So it's like 90 minutes to get out there, even in a turboprop. And then we drop down to 800 feet and we just start cruising back and forth and back and forth. And we have 90 minutes in the search area, and then we got to go.
Is it at least bright on the hull?
No, it was gray.
Yeah, that'd be
No,
difficult.
I think since then they make those a little bit brighter.
Right.
But we're cruising back and forth and back and forth, and then finally I hear Aaron and Greg kind of bickering on whether or not they saw something, and I turned around and I was like, "It's our airplane for the day. Like, tell the captain to turn around." So the way they had to turn was the opposite direction because of the way the wind was blowing. It turns that direction, and this airplane's wing does a Vanna White, and just there it is.
Wow.
So we can't do anything at this point, but we know exactly where it is, so we can kind of reset the drift pattern. Meanwhile, back on shore, Pat had been talking to his old roommate, whose dad was the CEO of Foss Tugs up in Seattle, and they had a connection to Brinken Towing in Puerto Rico, and we land at 5 o'clock, and at 9 o'clock, it's been decided that we're going to get on this 110-foot tugboat to head out into the middle of the ocean.
Jeez.
And this tugboat is full of these amazing characters who would just be wonderful in a cast of any movie. There's 3 or 4 languages spoken on board. One guy makes this incredible habanero hot sauce, and they're just looking at us like, we're going to go find a rowboat? Like, you guys are nuts. And so we have, it'll take about 2 days to get out there, and then 3 days in the search area, and that's all we have time for. And so the boat's been moving the whole time. So the search area has gotten a little bit smaller, but it's still going to be a big search area.
Right.
The crew thinks we're crazy, but by the time we get out there, like, everybody's enthusiastic. So people are scanning the horizon, the first day in the search area. And we're taking, everybody's like taking some naps to make sure that they're fresh and have fresh eyes on the horizon. They're scanning above the water, and it's perfect weather for a search. And at the end of the day, nothing. So I call up Greg, and I was like, man, like, look, we're already deep into this.
Yeah.
If we're serious about finding this boat, we're going to send up an airplane again. Like, that's just what it is.
Right.
Like, we've already gotten to this point. We've already gambled.
Yeah.
Like, we may as well just keep pushing. So the next day, the airplane goes up, and actually Wade was able to go up in it. And I know what time they're going to take off. I know when they're going to be in the search area, and we're just expecting for this airplane to fly around and then just like wiggle its wings, and there's no airplane. And so like 5 o'clock rolls around, and I was like, I just want to hear that they're okay.
Right.
And 5:30, this guy named Carlos comes to the bridge, not the bridge, I was on top of the bridge, and he crawls up the ladder. He's like, dude with the beard, they found your boat. So it was like 20 miles away. So we start cruising throughout the night, just really, really slow. And so the search area has just gotten incrementally smaller.
Right.
And so now it starts out looking for a parked car in an area the size of Rhode Island. And then it drops down into an area the size of like King County in Seattle. And then now it's like the size of the city of Seattle. But we're still looking for a parked car.
Yeah.
Like a gray hull in the water.
And it's still moving.
And
too.
it's still moving. So, like the crew that's on deck throughout the evening, like everybody stays up. And so in the morning, the entire boat is just like eyes on the horizon.
Is this your last day then?
This is the last day.
Yeah.
This is the morning of the third day. And so the captain of this boat, he was this a Muslim Honduran named Israel.
That is an interesting combination of things.
Great combination.
Right.
And so he's looking at I couldn't make this up.
No, you can't.
He's looking at the radar, and then Aaron, our photographer, is like looking at the horizon, and then like he like sees something, and he walks out just as she's raising her hand, and I raise the binoculars to my eyes, and like there it is. There's the boat in the middle of nowhere.
God.
So the crew was like, well, we're not actually going to get in the water to help get the boat because like that's going to be your deal. And so Marcus and I knew that, and so on the way out there we'd been like, how are we going to do this? Like we don't really know the condition it's going to be in. We know it's probably upside down. There's no reason why that would have changed. And so we come across the boat, and it's like there's tons of fish underneath it, and all of our line is like, hey, it's like a jellyfish hanging down. And like, thank God it's just perfect weather. It's like this 3 days of weather has just been absolutely perfect. Marcus and I get into our swimsuits and life vests and dive in, and we end up blowing the water out of the cabin and then wrapping the boat and then getting on top of it and holding the dagger board while the tugboat guns it.
So you're just you're tubing behind the tugboat then?
Basically to try and flip it over. So it flips over once and then flips over again, and then we have to rewrap it and do it again.
Wow.
Finally get this thing up, pump it out, and get it on board, and it's just like it's swinging across the deck. It's a wonder that nobody got hurt. We strap it down, we start heading back, and then the weather turns.
Oh.
And so we're cruising down, and this time, like we're in maybe 10-foot seas, and the boat's going back and forth, and they'd made a bed out of this, huge amount of rope. And I looked down, and I was like, there's some of the rope is going through the scupper. And I mean, this is a line that if it gets caught in one of these propellers, like it's going to stop the boat. Like
yeah.
It's huge. It's like the line is the size of, my forearm.
Right.
So they stop the boat, and now the boat is, or the ocean rowboat sitting in the bed of this tugboat, half of it is not being supported. And so I go down there and have to get down and I have to pull in all this line, come down, and I was like, you guys got like, I need an axe, a 2x4, and a sledgehammer. And so I end up cutting a wedge on this, it was a 4x4, and then shoving it under the transom of the boat and then hammering that thing into place.
Jeez.
And it's just like as the boat's rolling back and forth, it just... After that, I went in the shower and just had a good cry.
Yeah. And you made it back then, I assume, eventually.
Yeah, we made it back.
Good
the boat
God.
made it back. We salvaged all of our footage. That's what ended up getting used for... We got on Dateline, and it's because we had that footage.
And is there a documentary about either one of these trips? Because I feel like you have enough footage to do one, right?
We have enough footage. We've never been able to get the interest.
Oh, I see.
So, I mean, it's all sitting in a giant... waterproof case in my closet. And yeah, I mean, like it's a funny thing because I mean, I tell the story and people are like, oh, there should be a documentary about it. And yeah, I think so too. It'd be great. Right. But like, I'm much more of a writer than a documentarian. Sure. It'd be great to have that energy come towards it. But
it's a lot of work. I'm married to a documentarian. That's
yeah.
what she's doing right now. She's editing up. She's making a documentary called Newly Nomads. It was our first year on the road.
Oh.
Because no one's really done that for like full-time RVers
nice.
Yet. And so that's what she's working at home. But it takes a long time to get that kind of thing right. I mean, it's just like a book. It's just like, you just got to sit down and hammer away, and it's probably just you. And yeah, it's a big project.
Yeah.
So when you're in Seattle now, or whenever you go back to Seattle, I suppose, is your home still there? Wasn't destroyed or anything?
No.
That's good.
No. I mean, it's very, very dull in my neighborhood.
That's good. Okay. Well, that's what we hope for. By the way, do you know Alina Iskandarova?
Yeah, just because she's around the
From the
area
internet?
too, and then she's also from. Yeah, I mean, I like dinosaurs.
Yeah. So she's been on the podcast before as well. I actually
Cool.
I did a podcast with her when we were up in Seattle. She's a paleontologist. We had a great talk about that kind of stuff. She's awesome. She was actually, I think she was in the Grand Canyon about like a week before we went up there.
Nice.
And she was doing all sorts of paleontology stuff up there. What a badass.
Yeah.
I think she was just in Forbes too. Shout out Alina.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, no, I just I ended up running into her because I don't know, I was following another paleontologist account, and yeah, just like some of her photos, and then yeah, that's a funny little synchronicity.
She took me on a hike up into some mountains to go find some fossils, and we did. We found a lot of them, and it was really, really cool.
That's cool. That's very cool.
Yeah, she's a badass. Okay, but what I was going to ask is, when you're in Seattle and you're looking out at the Pacific, does anything ever go through your mind? Like, hey, that's next. Has anybody ever done the Pacific?
Yeah. Actually, there's quite a few people that have done the Pacific.
What would you do when it comes to Pacific? Like, what would be the path you might take?
It's that's the thing about ocean rowing, and I think a lot of really big endurance stuff like that is that you can all of them are a really awesome accomplishment, but it's people can kind of slice and dice them to kind of get their piece of the record pie, which I mean is just as true for us, as like kind of like a little. I'm really pumped that I got a Guinness World Record. I think it's super cool.
It's badass.
And I recognize that like the first two guys to do it were basically just 50 miles off.
Right.
So like, yeah, it is cool. And hey, if it sells some books, awesome. It's but it is something that I try and take with a little bit of levity. So yeah, I mean, for crossing the Pacific, it's like there's a race from the mainland to Hawaii, but there's some people that are trying to go all the way from Japan all the way to North America.
Right. You just got to give it a few years too, right? Because aren't they getting closer? Isn't that?
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
Japan's definitely drifting this direction. Give it a few years.
Be
a little
shorter
easier
every year.
See, and then it won't be the same accomplishment if they do it in 100 years.
There you go.
Like, come on, we did it. And they're gonna have all the new technology. They're not. They're gonna have some boat that doesn't flip because they.
You just gotta finish a row and then do a marathon once you hop on.
And then
they're
gonna be just gene-edited humans. I'm going to a weird place here now. But we do have advantages now. I mean, I think it was funny. I was watching the trailer for the book, actually, which had some of that awesome footage where I was like, where's the documentary? And one of the things you guys were talking about with food, I think somebody mentioned pretzels and Chex Mix. And I'm thinking like the guys who did that first probably didn't have pretzels and Chex Mix.
They had 17
totally
bottles
different.
of wine and 500 eggs.
Really?
As well as other things. Yeah, no, it's...
Did they bother to cook the eggs, or they just...
I'm not sure
straight up Sylvester Stallone...
Probably a little bit of both.
Eat that.
It's
Arnie eats them whole.
Yeah,
you ever hear that? Schwarzenegger.
Like with the shell?
He'll put the shell, the whole thing, in like a smoothie, blend it on up.
I can see that.
That sounds like death right there. That sounds like a good way to find some salmonella.
Yeah. But I mean, it hasn't killed him yet.
No, yeah. But doesn't it feel like as history goes on, like an accomplishment becomes like just a little bit less and a little bit less, because it's like, well, we have everything at our advantage.
Yeah, I've thought a lot of, I mean...
How much scarier is it to do without a radio?
Yeah, well, because like, everybody back in the day was bigger and tougher and, all this stuff. Like there's always like that way to look at it. And I think that, like I think of the Harbo and Samuelson guys, and man, rowing out there in an open boat, like that is incredibly exposed. But back then, they weren't taking an extra risk. Like these guys were both, they rowed 20 miles a day to go dig clams. Like that was part of what they were about. Day after day, they had sailed across the ocean several times. They were working with a top of the line boat for the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so the idea of a water maker or anything else, like they weren't taking into their risk factor into account. They were like, we're going to do this as best we can with the best available technology. And they did. Like they geeked out like the way we did. And I mean, I was kind of reading their story was the way that like I liked their quality of doing that I was like, well, we got to bring that to, the updated version of that. So yeah, like are they tougher? Like are the people that did stuff in the past tougher than me? Yeah, absolutely.
Well, also that's not the point I'm trying to make, just for the record. That is not my point.
No, but
it's still incredibly tough achievement, and it's absolutely wild to think about it. No matter what age you're dealing in, it's tough. it just makes me think about the distant future. I think it's way less about thinking about the past, because I think we are still at a point where we are way closer to that recent past than it's about to be, because I see technology growing exponentially, and that means that distance is not linear in terms of what someone's going to have in 50 years compared to what we have compared to 50 years ago. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it changes at a rate that is kind of astonishing. I do think the weird one is when you get into, I think the big thing for athletics is when people get into, it's not necessarily about steroids anymore, but it is about like changing your genes, like CRISPR, lots of other things like that, where it's like, is that the future athlete? And then who are we to say that that's wrong, but also, is it the same?
Yeah.
Is it the same accomplishment?
Yeah, it's I don't know, it's really, it's hard to say.
It makes me think about what you were saying when you were talking about why people started getting into these like organized sports for different reasons. Where it's like, now we've got leisure time. Let's go back and do something that was sort of traditionally done, and then that's going to become a sport. That's going to become the achievement. But I feel like, hang on, bear with me, because there's a thought here. I just am chasing it down. I feel like that trajectory. Oh, are we making friends? Oh yeah, we're quite the spectacle out here on the Rio Grande doing a podcast. I feel like that reminds me of a thought from an author I really like named Christopher Ryan. He wrote a book called Civilized to Death and Sex at Dawn. And he always talks about this idea that we move farther and farther away from our humanity and explore technology, but then at some point there's a turn back. There's always a turn back in the story. And I feel like that's kind of what you were describing in a way, when it's like we've lost rowing as something that's a necessity for life, but now there's a turn back to it, because we're like, but there was some necessity to it. There was something that was good for us, and there was something that was integral to being a human and traveling on water in that way. Let's give me some amateur historian take on this then. Was rowing the Atlantic a common thing at any point? I mean, I'm thinking Vikings, but they had sails.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is you would have, Vikings developed a really nimble little boat that brought them, to a lot of different places, and it also had oars. But I mean, they would days that you could sail, they definitely weren't going to row.
Yeah.
It's I mean, I think that there's, like, we have in the last 100 years, there's all these, crazy extreme sports that have popped up. And I think they kind of fill this role of humans needing to do these big physical things. I mean, I'm sure that if I had worked as a whaler, where I had to chase after a whale and then turn around and throw a spear into it.
Moby Dick is one of my favorite books.
Yeah,
of all time,
like
by the way.
that is one of the most crazy things I can possibly think of.
Yeah.
Like, you probably wouldn't need to feel to want to do anything else extreme.
It's fucking terrifying.
It's absolutely terrifying.
It's terrifying. I mean, I'm someone who's already afraid of the water. I did an episode of the podcast with I don't know his credential. I want to call him a marine scientist of some sort. My buddy Ross from Florida, and he and I talked about my massive fear of the water. You ever heard of thalassophobia? You're familiar with this? See, you don't have this, because you can go out on the open ocean and swim around and be just fine. But I'll go in a pool and be like, there's probably a great white shark behind me. So different vibes. But the image of like a whale going by in the water is terrifying to me. It's so big. And then I'm going to spear that and ride that bitch like a roller coaster. That's just gnarly. That is as gnarly as gnarly gets.
I mean, on the second row, we had some pot of really like big fin whales beneath us.
Wow.
And I was able to like dive in and to like look at a whale.
Yeah, see,
underneath the boat.
You and I don't have the same perspective on how terrifying that is.
I mean, but it's a wonderful kind of terrifying.
I get it.
If you ever make it up to Seattle, we'll have to do a podcast in the boat.
That'd be fun. Yeah, I'm not opposed to it. It's just, and that's the thing, right? It's just like anything else. Like, I don't let fears stop me from doing interesting things, but I acknowledge them.
Yeah,
they're there. That shit scares me so bad. But I can't imagine being in a rowboat and having a whale go by. I'd be like, I'm going home.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, you have to row back.
Yeah, once you're out there, right?
Yeah, once you're out
You've
there.
sort of. I think that's an interesting thing. You have one type of safety net, which is to keep the guys from dying who has got a pregnant wife and a kid, and nobody wants to die. So we've got some safety net that we can call some people, but the safety net of like of the rules you've set for yourself are totally different, which is like we've got to either get there or row back. Like that's what we're doing out here. Was there ever a conversation of like, are we done? Did that ever happen?
No.
There's never a thought to turn around. Wow, it got really windy on me here.
Yeah. No, on the first or second row, like both times we were all really very we were just very committed to it. Like everybody took it really seriously, and I think took each other's feelings into account of how, keeping an eye on everybody to make sure that it was everybody's responsibility to look after everybody else. Because if one person gets to the point where they can't function, you lose 25% of your power. And so looking after one another was absolutely critical.
What about when it comes to injuries? Was there ever any danger?
We got really lucky. No one strained anything. I think there might have been like a few little pulls here and there, and you'd be like, "Oh man, I'm just a little bit extra sore today."
Yeah.
But no, nothing major. Well, I mean, the major one is, and it's funny, but it's not. Like Greg got super constipated, and especially when you're in your early 20s and you're a dude, most early 20s dudes don't ever experience that, and so we thought it was funny at first, and then it was like, actually, this could be a showstopper.
Yeah, that could be enough pain to stop someone from performing entirely.
Yeah, that was the only thing that, besides the tropical storm, that kept us from rowing. Kept him from rowing. But we were able to, that shut us down to, 3 rowers for a little bit, and that was a big deal. And Greg's a really tough guy.
Yeah.
And it just, it's tough.
It's not just the pressure of like, I have to perform for these guys. I have to show up for all these guys. It's also the pressure of like, I need everybody else to show up too. Like, I am completely dependent on all 3 of you guys doing your jobs all the time. That is, that's got to be a bonding experience, man.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was one of the coolest things I've ever been a part of.
Yeah. Well, I didn't mean for us to necessarily go so deep on the book, because it must be, I know that it's been a while, so you're doing other stuff now, but obviously this is brand new to me, so I was fascinated by that. But you are doing some different stuff here because you're getting into more writing, and I've seen the woodworking. So what's next for you? What are you getting into?
So I ran the organization that we did it through was something that we put together. We called it Or Northwest, and that's what I did all the rowing projects with. And all the rowing projects were 2 rows across the ocean, 2 rows down the Mississippi River, and I managed a trip with 2 women going down the Columbia River, all under the Or Northwest auspice. And that lasted for 10 years. We got to the point where we were, the trip down the Columbia River and the second Mississippi River trip, those were all other people were doing those trips, and we're trying to get it to be this adventure education project that had legs to keep going. But we got it as far as we could, and then it just the energy was not there to keep it going at the rate that it needed to, and after 10 years of that, it was time to move on to other things. So the last few years, I started doing a rowing tour for Airbnb. So in non-pandemic times, if you're up in Seattle, find Rowing Urban Waterways, and I'll take you on a history tour of Seattle.
That sounds so cool.
By rowboat.
Man, I love that area. Is so great.
It's
I
gorgeous.
imagine from the water, that'd be phenomenal.
And so it's gorgeous, and it's a lot of fun to share, but it's always been like a side gig. And that was kind of me making some space between the Or Northwest and all these rows, and moving on to the next thing. And over the last few years, I've been working on a series of novels, and in order to support myself, I've been exploring different things. One of those was I fished for a season up in Bristol Bay, and then I got my real estate license just in time for COVID.
Great timing.
And then
they're still buying houses, aren't they?
Yeah, no, totally. But it was not a good time to get into it, and it also made me re-examine like what I really need to be doing. I mean, I'm a writer. That is the one thing that's tied all of the things that I've done together. And about this time last year, I was getting work for doing some content marketing for Filson through a friend of mine, and that gave me the confidence to be like, okay, like I need to pursue freelance and just figure out what a writing career looks like. And I mean, writing career for me in 2020, 21, I'm figuring out what that looks like. So my overarching goal is to finish these novels that I've been working on. But along the way, I gotta do a lot of to promote those, to get people to read those books. I gotta promote my old book. It's just sending out query letters looking for writing opportunities, I'll probably, hopefully I'll be able to work again on a fishing boat this year, because putting together something creative is tough. And there's really not a whole lot of money in a lot of this stuff until you get to a certain point. And so figuring out how to make that work is going to be stuff like the fishing, stuff like these rowing tours, while I start to build up, both a, reputation as a freelancer, and, all of this is in support of me finishing these books and getting them out there and getting them to market.
Yeah. What's your process when you're writing? Like, I know a lot of guys have a different way of going about it. They'll sit down and it's sort of torturous, but make yourself just write, or how do you come at it?
Well, I think that the one thing is you can't wait for the muse to show up. You just have to show up anyway.
Sounds like some War of Art stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, like I've read that book, and it's something that I definitely agree with, because you have to be able, but it's also a balance. Like you got to be able to put yourself in the mood that the muse is willing to show up.
Yeah.
And for me, the most effective way to do it, which is also kind of the hardest time for me to get together, is, if I can get a few weeks that I can block off and just do one thing, then I can move really, really quickly. But that's not where I'm at right now. So I've been playing around with like what's effective for me, and right now it's 2 days working on my novel, 2 days doing other work, and just back and forth. And the thing is I'm able to keep up I'm very motivated to do all of those things, especially because having a single goal and then evaluating all of these other things, are they supporting that goal? But on that, getting up early is something that helps me. Reading while
rowing too.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't been able to do my tours this year, and I mean, it was part of the reason I'm down here in New Mexico, because it's winter and the Airbnb tours are all closed. But yeah, once things start to open up, that's something that I'm hoping to hop back into, because I've really missed taking people out and showing them the city. Seattle's got a really wonderful, bizarre history, and the places that I can take people in that boat are something that you don't really expect to be in the middle of a city. It's like, I mean, here we are on the Rio Grande in the middle of Albuquerque.
Yeah, we are.
And it doesn't, feels like we're in the middle of the wilderness.
Yeah.
And there's places like that are in Seattle, and I get to share that with people.
I was just thinking it's so funny because most podcasts, based on where we are, we're talking about that town that we're in. Like in Tucson, I'm all talking about Tucson. But here, since I haven't really gotten a chance to be in Albuquerque, and you're only here temporarily, it's sort of like we're talking about Seattle more than Albuquerque. Yeah. That makes sense, man. I mean, that's a place we both know, because I still don't know the scene around here. I only have one thing I really want to do here, and I don't think I'm gonna do it. It's the Breaking Bad tour.
Oh yeah.
That'd be kind of fun, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I heard it was a really good show. I just, there's just so many good shows.
You haven't watched Breaking Bad?
I haven't.
Good Lord, man.
I know.
Yeah. Well, it's, you're at a point now where what's the drive to watch it, other than the fact that you live in the town where it was shot? I was going to go to the Walter White house. Apparently it's here. But I've heard that the owner is one of those people, those people who kind of get joy out of being frustrated? Apparently the owner of this house loves hanging out outside and being upset with people for driving by this house or snapping a picture of it, right? So it's like, why'd you buy the fucking house then? But to each their own, I guess, if that's what brings you joy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just there's so much around Albuquerque, New Mexico, that's really like you could have a month worth of day trips here.
Yeah.
And check out some really gorgeous spots.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, White Sands, Las Cruces is a great town, by the way, too. How long did you live there for?
I was there from 3 till 11.
Yeah, man, that place is awesome.
Yeah,
I loved it out there.
And like all the Mesilla, Socorro, like all the old Spanish towns have these great little plazas that are just wonderful to just wander around, because it feels like you're back in time.
Yeah, it does. I'm going to miss the Southwest. I think we're probably heading east after this for a bit. I think we'll be in Texas for a while. But then a lot of our work over the summer takes us into the Midwest and out east. And so the only time I get to come play out here usually is in the winter.
Yeah.
But, there's worse places you can be.
It's true.
We're going to lose your pen there. Hang on.
Yeah. When do you...
Good Lord, this wind is killing us now.
Yeah. When do you head out to Seattle?
I don't know when we'll be back up there. We were there in, what was it? Like May, I guess, last year. It always depends on where the work takes us. Mm-hmm. So when it's the next time a client needs us up there, that's when I'll be up there.
Cool.
And I'll definitely look you up because I'd love to get a tour.
Yeah.
Phenomenal, man. And let me know when you have your other books coming out too.
Yeah.
We'll get back on. You can tell me all about them.
Yeah. I'm at Jordan Hanssen on Instagram and jordanhanssen.com. And the other thing I'd like to talk about is that I'm doing a project that I started last year about this time. So just as the pandemic was getting real, I was out rowing with my housemate. It's a beautiful Seattle early spring sunset, rowing along, and there's this dude playing the saxophone in his boat. And it's just this amazing image of just a man playing music in a tiny boat.
Just for himself? He didn't have
Just for himself.
No audience.
No audience. I mean, there was tons of people around, but it wasn't for them. It was just for him. And it was just a very compelling image. Came back that evening. I saw the Italians singing into the street early on in the pandemic. And I just got this idea. I was like, I have to put musicians in the back of my boat, because at that point we didn't know how long this was going to last.
Right.
So I was like, okay, I'm sure I can find a few musicians and get 14 songs together for 2 weeks. And Monday I start calling around, and I just felt crazy. Like, while everybody's buying toilet paper, I'm like, hey, I need you to come in my boat and play some music.
Yeah, but none of us knew what was going on at that time, man. That was like, that's like what we started talking about. It could have been anything at that point.
Totally.
We had no idea.
So by Friday, I just, nothing's really happened. And it just seems like it's just a fanciful idea that, sucked up a week of my time. And then Friday afternoon, I get a phone call, and all these people start coming to sit in the back of my boat and play music. And so I've been filming these things. And over the weekend, I ended up getting, over 40 of them. And the very last, I got the last one like an hour before the governor, signed the order to close down Seattle, close down Washington. And so I fed out these, one a day for the next, 40 or so days. And the next, by that time, it made the news a little bit. Then I went and collected another 60 and fed those out through August of 2020. So now I'm working on season 3, and I'm about 12 in, and I got some, ended up through this tiny boat session, that's what I'm calling it.
Yeah.
Which is also on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, is one of my connections there, a beautiful singer. He lived on his boat, and he sailed it to Hawaii, and he needed help sailing back. So I went and sailed back with him this August, or last August, and shot some tiny boat session. But now that I'm here in Albuquerque, I'll be doing a bunch of them here on the Rio Grande.
That's awesome.
So I'm collecting another 100, and
is it all going to be local musicians then? It's all
yeah,
it's Albuquerque.
It's
folks?
well, there's gonna
or New Mexico folks. Maybe?
I don't know how many songs I'll end up getting. Hopefully it'll be. I'd love to get 20, and I have 5 or 6 artists interested right now. I got a canoe that's a little bit broken that I'm fixing, and I'll do it here on the Rio Grande next weekend.
That's nice. See, I would have suspected you would have carved your own canoe by now.
Yeah,
right?
I've been working on other things.
Okay.
I've been carving. Do you know club bells and things like that?
Like for working out?
Like meals and India clubs.
Oh no, I don't know what that is. No.
Oh, I think
the only type of club I know is clubs you work out with, like maces and stuff like that.
Yeah, like maces. Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, like maces, meals, and India clubs. These are So that's another one of my land hobbies. So I've been carving some of those.
You just can't sit still, can you?
Nah, not really.
That's a good thing. That's a good attribute to have, man, especially for a writer, because that's what it is. It's like, I'm not going to just sit here. We're going to get something done. That's great, man. So where can people find that again? Remind me.
It's just Tiny Boat Session on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. I'm going to be kind of revisiting all the last 100 that I filmed over the next month or two, and then I'll start putting out new ones probably in April.
That's great.
And so I don't know. I mean, it's I'm looking for submissions. If people have a song, a tiny boat, and a smartphone, I'd love to feature your Tiny Boat Session, or just check them out. I mean, it's simply to make people smile.
Nice. I love stuff like that, man. That's great. So the book is Rowing into the Sun, Jordan Hanssen on social media with 2 S's. Go check him out, and keep me apprised, man. Let me know when the next book comes out. We'll hop on.
Tyler.
We'll probably do something virtual, but we'll hop on, and I'll see you next time we're in Seattle, of course.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for reaching out and finding me here in Albuquerque. It's very random that it ended up that way.
I know it is kind of strange. I'm going to be doing a bunch of remote episodes, as far as I know, for people who are tuning in, because we're just moving around a lot, and that's kind of how it goes. It's a lot easier for me when we stay in a place for a month to be able to find a bunch of people. But if I've just got a couple of weeks, have a guest like you on, it's been phenomenal. Great talking with you.
Yeah, cheers. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. As always, thanks to our sponsor, Track Farms, and the excellent CBD they've been sending me. I love that stuff, and they're good guys. Check it out, track-farms.com/strangers. I think they're even doing a Valentine's thing. It depends when this episode comes out, but check them out. They got a bunch of deals going on. As always, thanks to my guest, Jordan Hanssen. You can find the photos on Instagram. I'll post them at my account, at @THicksonLife, as usual. Check out the video version, all that good stuff. What other reminders do I have? That's all I've got for the people. So check us out. Thanks again for listening. As always, we will see you on the next episode.